when Joe started to tell me about this panel, we started to talk about it, I mean, literally 6 months ago. And this is because I have been working for a long time in internationalization at Oracle, Adobe, and Microsoft, and basically building things and infrastructure from the ground up. And at some point I thought, it's like, I am in Silicon Valley, why not to try to be, to go to a startup? And when the opportunity came, I actually joined the startup as a full-time staff, and basically had to drive everything, from the ground up. There were a lot of legacy systems in that particular case, but, we had an incredible tight deadline that, we were able to meet. After that project, I decided to start consulting, and actually that gave me very good experience on the different types of startup environments that are happening here and what types of needs happen for internationalization. And currently, I'm actually leading the internationalization of the Anita Borg Institute initiatives. And Anita Borg is the largest organization of women in tech. It's a social enterprise, and we are about 30 people. And it's going very well. I'm building the platform, and as I was telling one of my friends here, is that you build it and they will come. Then it's going to be, it's happening very, very quickly. But I want to thank you guys for coming here, Joe and Box, for organizing this panel. And my panelists today, because they really are amazing. You're going to hear about their experiences as well, and we're going to learn a lot.
Hi there, my name is Jamie Cox. I was the last one on the list there. I'm the project management lead at Gengo. So if you're unfamiliar with Gengo, we're a crowdsourced translation startup. So not only are we a startup, but we also service a lot of startups as well. I've been there for just about 3 years. So Gengo has a retail form where people can just go and put in, an email and get it translated very quickly. But there's also the enterprise side as well for bigger clients who, for one reason or another, don't want to use the retail form, don't have time, that kind of thing. So that's where the project management team comes in. We make sure that the projects from kind of inception to completion all get done. And it's my job to kind of manage the projects and also the project management team. We've got teams all over in our Tokyo office, here in San Mateo, over there in San Mateo, and also in Berlin and London as well. So kind of making sure everyone's corralled and doing well is part of the job. Also, and before working at Gengo, I was actually a freelance translator myself. I did Japanese to English translations.
Tex?
Hi, I'm Texin. I'm a globalization consultant working in this space for more than 20 years, helping companies around the world of all sizes, some enterprise, some startup level. And I'm also, as Joe mentioned, now a proud grandfather, so I claim to be the head of a clan all of a sudden. And I was tempted to bring all sorts of baby pictures, but I'll suppress that for now.
Okay. Hello, my name is Igor Afanasyev, and I am a director of localization at Evernote. Evernote is a cross-platform productivity service, and we have 150 million users worldwide, and 70% of our users come from outside of the United States. I've been with Evernote for 9 years already, even before Evernote started its new chapter as a cross-platform service. And I've been a witness of how a small startup with 30 people emerged into a big company with 400 people in 12 offices worldwide. And since 2008, I've been primarily working on developing our localization infrastructure. And what we have built here is a fully automated continuous localization solution. And on top of that, we run our internal translation agency with 30 people who cover all our translation needs. And this allows us to save money on translation and deliver translation in time and with greater quality. And today I will try to tell more about our process and about our decisions and about challenges that we had.
Before we start, I wanted just to capture a little bit about the expectations, and if there's any questions, like why are you here, and if there's any questions in your mind so that we can address this as part of the panel. Nobody has questions before we start? All right.
How many of you work for a startup?
Who wants to work for a startup? Exactly. All right, then this is good. Then hopefully the information will be new to you. Some of it will be, some of it will not. We'll figure that out. Then, I mentioned that I left Microsoft and I joined the startup. And what happened next was that the reason they hired me is because they thought that, they thought that bringing international in-house, they were going to address their growth problem. Many of these startups, grow fast and then they kind of get into a flat, growth curve, and they have to basically keep growing. And one of the low-hanging fruits is internationalization or localization. And they have these humongous, huge expectations, and they have to basically figure out, I have to go and talk to them and tell them, this is basically what is possible in the short term and what is possible in the long term. And then one of the big things, when you first start working with a startup, is going to be that they are very different from traditional companies that we know. And Text is going to talk more about that.
Okay, I'm going to move forward to bring the slides forward a couple.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. One more. So this is a traditional internationalization process. It may be a little bit, I'm sure it's a little bit hard for you to read in the back, but you start out with a vision for where you're going, and then maybe you do some agile user iterations and try and figure out where you are. You start with a tier 1 market, you get more complex. And then eventually you get to phase 3 where you have world-ready products and you're doing SimShip all around the world. And so today we're trying to focus on what it means to be doing internationalization and localization at a startup. And so when Claudia proposed the panel to me, I thought maybe I'd go try and figure out what a startup is. Several of you raised your hands. I wonder if we're all using the same definition. I took a look around on the web and found all sorts of definitions for startup. The one I liked is that you're working on some innovative technology or working in a disruptive space, something that hasn't been done before, as opposed to just being in a small company that's doing something that has been done before, but you're starting out doing that again. Is that how you people think about it? Is the microphone working?
Maybe high-tech startups, yeah.
For high-tech startups, yeah, that's what I had in mind. So, so if you're working in I'm going to go with this innovative approach definition. And if you're working in that space, maybe this traditional approach doesn't really apply. And in fact, as a consultant, I tend to think, I always have to think about this list. Maybe it's a good way to have a model, but for any business I'm working with, I want to test the assumption that these are the right steps for that particular business. But it's especially true if you're working in an innovative market. So let's talk a little bit about the idea of asking, we're going to use an agile approach, we're going to have weekly updates, we're going to go to a community of users and ask them for their feedback on how it should go. That may be a good model for some companies, but for some innovative or disruptive technologies, it's not such a good idea. Let's take something like Twitter, which was new not all that long ago. I'm not sure if you guys will remember your first reaction when somebody said, hey, here's this message system, it's limited to 140 characters. Would you like to use that? Did you go brilliant, or did you go, I've got email, I can do as much as I want with email, why do I need a Twitter? Maybe a little bit more current is when Amazon spoke only 6 months ago or so about drones. I remember 60 Minutes doing that story, and the next day everybody was going, he's crazy, why would you have drones delivering packages? And it was about a month later, you see drones being used for all sorts of applications, and now we're going, where are my drone deliveries, right? So now you're going to take your innovative idea, like 140 character messages, and go ask your users, how do you want to use them? They're not ready for that. You can't ask the market about that and get meaningful feedback. Maybe that's not the best example, but you can get that, you get the sense of what I'm talking about. There are other things that are even more radical where your users don't appreciate. Now, some companies, when they have an idea, when they have a vision, they want to hit that vision no matter what. They're determined, maybe it's 5 years or 10 years, to deliver some service or product, and they know what they want, and they do not want to be persuaded to do anything else. Okay? So, I don't know if you guys know the history of like Microsoft. Bill Gates was always talking about computers being on every desk. At the time, it was kind of an outrageous idea, and he focused on that, and that was his idea for the PCs. Even though he couldn't think about that, what it meant, or what the achievement would look like way back then. But he didn't want to be persuaded to change his company to anything else. Now, a lot of other companies, when they think about agile development, they say, I'm going to go with whatever sticks. I'm going to see what, I have an idea, I'll deliver it, I'll test it with users, but maybe something else resonates for what I'm trying to do. I'm going to follow the money. And the product changes, and it changes, it'll become something else where they can earn a lot of revenue. That's a different model. So if you're following this approach, you have to know when you're internationalizing or localizing what the end game is. You may have to be prepared for, I'm focusing on the long term, this one vision, and I want to hit that. I'm setting up processes and infrastructure to do that. Or, no, I'm following whatever this company does, and if it changes next week because of feedback we got from users, then we're going to do that. So, we're expecting a very interactive discussion, so I'm seeding these ideas. I'm hoping you're going to challenge some of these ideas or want to pursue them. Thanks for changing the slide. So, I'm only supposed to talk for 10 minutes, so I want to just run through a couple of things. We talked about whether you have a determined vision or an opportunistic vision, whether you need to educate the market about what you're delivering, or whether you can ask the market whether what you're delivering is right for that market. You also need to know who in the market you're talking to. Are most of you familiar with crossing the chasm? Some people are, but not everyone. The really brief version is, to be successful in the market, you're first going to be picked up by early adopters. These are the technologists, guys who try gadgets and are happy to work with them and get excited, and then introduce your product to the more conservative organizations who, once the adopters endorse it, then they're willing to pick it up. So if you're going out and testing your product in the market, you need to know, am I working with these adopters who may not represent the conservative users, or should I go find those conservative users in order to try and be more successful? And like a lot of startups, maybe their first market is not even end users. Maybe you're trying to get VCs, and the market that you have to test your product with is that space of VCs, or maybe the space of partners who will then take your product further. So when you're talking about designing and testing your product and thinking about who you're globalizing for, maybe a different community than the community you're going to end up with. When you have an innovative product, the existing tools for internationalization may not work. The existing processes for localization may not work. I think you may hear a little bit about that from some of my colleagues. And of course, the traditional challenges may not apply because now you may be dealing with completely new problems for how to deal with localization. So a friend of mine works for on gestures. If you have a TV set that is now looking out into your living room and taking commands based on gestures, the whole concept of what does that mean for internationalization and localization becomes different. Somebody pointing to themselves may be indicating, oh, I mean do this for me, as opposed to somebody else in the room. They might be saying, I'm having a heart attack, because in Asia, when you point to yourself, you point up here, right? So, and whether you go like this to mean bigger, or whether it means something else around the world, is going to be different. So they have to research and come up with a very different set of rules for what does internationalization mean. Now, some of that can just be tested, but it's a whole new space, and what works and what doesn't work is not known today. So they have to develop ways to find that out. So, how am I doing on time? So maybe this is a good point. I think I've expressed enough of the challenges for what I consider a disruptive or innovative technology, and we have a little bit of time for questions before we move on. Thank you.
All right.
Any questions?
Questions, Rob. Then the format of this panel, by the way, is that we talk a little bit and then you guys can ask questions, because otherwise sometimes you have something in your mind and you don't want to wait to the end.
Who's working on something that they consider completely new, innovative technology? What about all those startup folks?
By definition, if you're in a startup, you can't talk about it.
Who would like to say yes but can't? Okay.
Well, one of the things that is happening is sometimes when you start working on a startup, because there is a totally different cadence, and the way that the expectations about how fast the things need to come out is very different from a big company. And the way that the teams interact, the way that the teams think about how they are going to be releasing the features. It's not going to be in even 6 months or 3 months. It's going to be either today or this week. Then, I wanted to add that, there's definitely a huge difference in cadence that you need to adapt to, and that definitely affects, the localization teams and the development teams, because as they are developing the features, they always have to think about, internationalizing at the same time. Then it becomes that the internationalization has to be part of the DNA of every single developer. You don't have the luxury that you can basically send something to the, internationalization team and then back again. And you basically, every single developer needs to understand what they need to do, such that you can basically push the button and make it available immediately, across the world. Then that's one more thing. But thank you, thanks. All right, then I have a question. Next slide. And it's about implementing internationalization. Igor started at Evernote, quite back, and she has a fantastic history of how the company was small, and if you can go through that, that would be great. And my question is about your technical, challenges that you faced during that process.
All right. So, I actually have no idea what this slide is about. I kind of like the picture. It reminds me of the Netflix series, which I like. Okay. So, one small disclaimer before I start. I will be talking much today about localization automation, but don't be fooled by the word localization, because any kind of localization of this sort I think, I genuinely believe, is a part of the internationalization process. So internationalization is not only about externalizing strings and making sure that date formats are correct and handling several locales. It's about creating a cohesive technical infrastructure for a global growth. So my story starts in 2008 when I was given a position of the manager of the Russian service. Historically, Evernote started in Russia, and we had 2 offices in Russia and here in the Bay Area. So my first goal was to make sure that Evernote is available in Russian language and prepared for the market. And we started to think about the localization. So going into Russia was our first step, not because it's like a big market, but because we knew this market and we could test things on that and then expand globally. At the same time, 2008 was not the very best year for the company. We were running out of money basically, and we were desperately searching for money for investors in the midst of the global financial crisis. So these were pretty fun times, and in the middle of those fun times I was basically given a carte blanche to implement localization, provided I will not beg for money, I will not beg for human resources, and I will not touch any engineers. So this was quite a bit of a challenge. So, okay, we needed to be creative. We needed to do everything on our own. And we wanted to start translating things ourselves and building up the infrastructure ourselves. So I looked at the options, and back then there were basically no tools which allowed us to anyhow automate the localization process. And there were virtually no tools to implement online translation. My initial vision was that we needed this online translation server that we would use for volunteers and we would use ourselves, and then have some infrastructure in between that would connect the translation server and our developers and our localized resources basically. So after some research, I found some tool called Poodle. It's pretty popular in the open source software localization. It's used by Mozilla to localize Firefox and all these other projects into more than 100 languages. It was free, so it was like a great deal for us. But it wasn't very good, so I started evaluating this thing and actively contributing my fixes to the code and to the UI to make sure that the product fits us, and started contributing to this open source community. And at the same time, I started shaping up this intermediate solution that would connect Poodle as a translation front end to our repositories. So what I started doing eventually in several years evolved into a pretty robust continuous localization platform that fully supports our needs and our global growth. So within around 7 months since we started, we translated Evernote into Russian and localized it and tested and pushed to the market. And of course, reaching new market is not only about setting up localization infrastructure and translating things, but also choosing local payment providers and doing some boring legal stuff. Luckily, we had the VP of our international operations who was in charge of legal stuff, and our CTO was good to make sure that every bit of our software or platform support new languages. So after we tested things in Russia, we identified some core markets that we want to be in, basically the markets that could bring us money. And this led us to having around 10 languages that we wanted to translate Evernote into. By this time, luckily, we found some investors and we were floating, and we could allow to go to localization vendors for translation. So things developed like that in several years. we expanded the list of our priority languages that we pay for from 10 to 20 plus languages. We developed many other parts of the software. We increased the number of strings, and we suddenly realized that we are paying too much money for not much value. For example, in 2013, our projected budget for localization for 2014 was around $500,000. And we were not very pleased with the quality of translation because our development was very agile, very fast. We added new features quickly, we removed features very quickly. Sometimes people would be translating some strings only to realize that they will be thrown away, basically. We already didn't have them in the code. So at the same time, we still had our internal localization platform plus online server, which we used internally for some languages, and we also had some volunteers who helped us translate Evernote into several languages. And we saw that this approach is much smoother and much better. And what we decided is to eventually go from localization vendors to our own translators that would foster and educate. Once we got around 10 people working for us, we suddenly realized that managing people is also a big challenge. So, okay, back to the drawing board. Started thinking where we can automate things again, and within several months, what we did is integrated like invoicing and reporting like modules into this online translation server, so that this was pretty transparent to translators. They could understand how much money they will earn. And for us, it was easy to pay people money and track all our spendings. So with that, we were able to quickly, after that, we were able to quickly move all languages from localization vendors to our own translators. And in the end, we got a system which allowed us to have to spend less money. We had, I think, around like 50% of the original budget in 2014 and in this year. And at the same time, we greatly increased the quality of translation because we could educate people and we could provide more context. We could upload screenshots to our translation server, and also they would provide translations quickly, which was like the key for us. So automation doesn't end here. We like automation. So the other thing we did, which also greatly increased like the overall process, is how we manage translation of marketing materials. In Evernote, we have around 75% of words related to marketing materials and 25% related to software. And eventually, we had basically a dedicated localization manager who would forward documents from internal people to translators and then back and then track all these things. This wasn't scalable and we couldn't save money on reusing translations. So what we did is implemented a pretty interesting solution around Google Docs. So anybody in the company can put the document in a specific folder, which we watch for, in Google Docs, and specify the number of languages that they want to translate this document into. And everything will be then automated. We will pick up changes, push them to our translation server, and once the translation server, once translations arrive, we will generate the localized doc with the same formatting and put it into Google Docs. This basically eliminates the need to go back and forward and for localization managers to like oversee the entire process. So our localization managers got some spare cycles, and they can actually do what they're intended to do: connect engineers with translators, provide additional context, educate them, and which also increases the quality. Another example of automation was, since we're using Zendesk for customer support, we have knowledge base there, so we implemented automation around that, and we push all our strings from Zendesk to our internal server for translation and then generate localized KB articles there. So this immensely simplifies the life of engineers, saves them a lot of time, it simplifies our life, it saves us money. And engineers actually do not ever touch any localized resources, basically. Some of our engineers, I suppose, do not know how localization works and what the magic happens behind this. So what they only do is they develop the English-only product, and they update strings, and they just know how to externalize strings properly. And all of a sudden, within several minutes, all the localization resources would be updated. Some of them would be already translated. We could have some translations in translation memory. So to recap, what we have is, first of all, we started internationalization early, and it became the part of our culture. The second thing is that we do not have any dedicated person related to internationalization in our company. Basically everyone, every developer, every decision maker knows that we are an international global company and plans accordingly. All our engineers know how to externalize strings, and we educate new people that come here at Evernote, and we make sure that everything goes smoothly. So, and we have this like fully automated process that, as I said, ensures that we can scale globally easily. We can add more translators, we can add more languages without affecting any kind of infrastructure. So this is it. 1 second. We're not atypical, and we do have challenges. Some of the challenges, this is like preempting your question. So some of the challenges come up from some bad decisions that were done early in the process. For example, we have like very nice corporate fonts that we use everywhere. Unfortunately, that when those fonts were chosen, nobody saw that they support all the like Unicode symbols there. So we constantly have this problem like popping over and over again in our clients and our like websites, and we have to spend more time on doing QA, on doing some overrides for locales which are not like fully supported, and basically spend time on this bad decision. The other example is, for example, support for plurals. Initially, we decided not to touch our engineers much as they wanted, and we decided that we can deal with this later. The problem is that later never happened, and we are still struggling into implementing this support in our code, which is already much bigger and requires to like re-educate our developers. But we're getting there. Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Do you guys have any questions? Great.
Yeah, I have 3 questions.
Okay.
So one is, do you use machine translation in any of this workflow? If yes, do your internal translators do post-editing on this? And the third question is, have you open sourced this solution?
These are very good questions. So, we, on our online translation server interface, there's a button which allows you to pre-translate the text using Google Translate. So, people are using it. We actually, so this allows people to translate quicker, but we have some internal, when we calculate how much translator gets paid for the translation, we always calculate what are the other translations that he's seeing. So if he uses this Google Translate button and then fixes just one word, he will be paid for this one word plus the review of the string. So yes, we do machine translation, but we not that we do not encourage it, but has some implications. I didn't hear correctly the second question.
You answered the second is, are your translators post-editing any machine translations that come through?
Okay.
So that's, yeah.
The third question is, we will open source it very soon.
Excellent.
I have a localize the wait and see. Yeah. Hi. I wanted to ask, when you decide to localize the app, right? Do you wait until you see a certain take up in that country, then you choose, then you do localization, or do you right away just you have a plan, then you just go country by country?
Well, we were pretty pragmatic of like the languages we want to translate into. So, as I said, Russia wasn't like the best market in terms of money, but it was a good like test for us. And what we did is we initially released Evernote only in English, and we accumulated the like response from different countries. For example, people do not go to Japan as a first market, but for us, Japan became a huge market because Evernote, even in English, which is unusual, became very popular. I don't know why, but yeah. So, and based on that, and based on some like general metrics like GDP per capita or like internet penetration, we just identified the markets that were potentially interesting for us.
Just very quickly, like anybody wants to ask? All right.
I think there's some more questions.
Yes.
What's the name of that freeware?
Hey,
Is it Quill?
Let's always use the mic, and the next person is over here. Oh.
Sorry, you already asked the same question that I wanted to ask, but it was basically, how did you decide the 30 languages? Is there a reason why there were 10? And that I'll come back to afterwards.
So the question is the same.
No, why 10 languages?
Why 10?
Yeah, and what
I mean, it's not. It wasn't like let's speak 10 languages. It was probably like 5 initially. Then we started adding more and more. It was a very natural process. We didn't pick any like random number and stick with it.
So hi, I'm from SurveyMonkey. I wanted to ask you. You said you have very high quality translation. How do you measure the quality? And how do you know your translations are high quality?
Well, we have channels. Like feedback from our users. We have 150 million users, and when something goes wrong, we really know about it. So we have marketing. Like when we try to expand into different countries, what we usually did is we found some PR agencies or marketing agencies, and they help us absorb feedback on the quality of translation, and we closely monitor that. And if anybody tells something about the quality of translation, we do investigation and we like double check. We order localization review from external vendors. And this is what we pay for. And if they tell that something is wrong, we will either just educate our translator. If it's like something very like criminal thing, that then we will change the translator.
One other question. Are you guys doing any kind of deep customization by language or transcreation of materials? And then how do you handle that when it differs from the English?
Well, I think there are 2 key markets that we are tailoring our content for more than for others. It's the first is Japan and the other is China. And when request comes from our Japanese office, from our Japanese translators, and from our China office, we see how we can deal with each situation. For example, for website, we can just overwrite some pages and create some totally different content. For some marketing materials, people can post-edit the generated documents, so they can first pre-translate them through our system, and then if they need to throw out something or to add something, they can easily do that as well.
All right, then what I'm going to do is to stop now and then let Jamie talk a little bit, and then at the end we can have more questions, because there's tons of interesting stuff. I definitely want to share the internationalization roadmap, because that actually is very different from big companies and small companies. Then Jamie, you're in.
Great, thanks. Can you change the slide? Thanks. But yeah, I'm going to talk about the localization aspect. Just to give a little warning or preface, this is from a vendor's perspective. Gengo is a vendor. So there's a certain point, of course you're not going to go to a translation agency, a vendor, without having some idea of what you want already. And so I don't really know as much about the back end or about the implementation, but I can kind of talk about what I see in my experience with our customers and our own experiences as well. A little bit about the infrastructure. So typically when a customer comes to us, comes to Gengo, it's usually one of two people. Sometimes it's a fully realized localization department, and we're talking to a localization manager. They know exactly what they want. They have a style guide that they've worked on with some other vendor perhaps. They maybe have a really robust translation memory that we work with. They might have all of these things, and we're just kind of filling in one piece of their localization process. The other one is we get a lot of marketing managers who come to us and they say, my boss just told me that I need to start translating our email blasts into French, and so I guess I have to do that, basically. That one's a little more exciting because we have to kind of figure out with them the best processes to follow along. But what's really great is there are a lot of different options out there, especially for a startup. I think that's kind of expected, right? That you have to be putting on a lot of different hats and you have to be figuring out things on the fly. So usually when people come to us, they at least have some semblance of what they want, and they're looking forward to reaching out into new markets. So that's a little bit of what I see in terms of infrastructure. Now vendor services. So there are a couple of different options. There's in-house, there's outsource, and there's crowdsourcing. I'm going to be a little bit biased in my opinions about crowdsourcing, just to forewarn you. Yeah, so I think each one works really well for different companies, right, and what they want to complete with their localization. So if you have tons of content that you need to translate and it needs a very specific voice, you might want to invest in having a whole group of in-house translators who are working exclusively for you, or nearly exclusively for you, because they're going to understand your content really well. They're going to know exactly what you want, and you're going to be able to work very closely with them. It's pretty similar with outsourcing as well. Typically it's a little bit more like work kind of continuously, because you have to find new translators when you're looking to expand into a new locale. And then you're interviewing them, you're looking at their work, and then you're getting feedback on their work from other people as well. So it's a little bit more work, and it can be a little risky, I would say, because freelancers naturally have a lot of work. Ideally, that's the goal, right? To have a lot of work that you're working on. And so they might not have time for the type of content that you're looking at. They might not have time to deliver when you want. And so it can be a little bit risky. Surreptitiously. Yeah, so in terms of crowdsourcing, it's definitely a good solution for specific clients. When you're cost conscious or when you're time conscious, crowdsourcing can be a really great idea, because you're using the power. In Gengo's example, we have 15,000 translators who are across multiple language pairs, but you can just kind of blast us basically with your content and get it back quite quickly, and for not too much money. And definitely we get a lot of customers who, just by sheer volume, sheer scale, they might have an in-house team, but they can't handle all of that content themselves. So we have a lot of workflows wherein a customer will send us content as sort of a first pass translation. They can get the translations back very quickly, and for a rate that's kind of reasonable for them. And then they have their in-house translators more acting like editors who get the voice right and get the brand right, and then that goes out. So that's kind of an interesting thing to do as well. I think one thing I want to say is as a startup, especially when you're kind of new to how you want to go global, you can try a lot of different things. So You might try working with a traditional LSP and find that that works really great. You might try working with machine translation and find that that works really great for what you need it to do. You might work with a crowdsourced model and find that that's exactly what you need as well. So I guess it's just like different strokes for different folks, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Any questions for Jamie? What about quality? Can you tell us about how do you ensure quality the different models?
Yeah, sure. I can talk mostly about the crowdsourcing model, or at least about Gengo's model. So to become a Gengo translator, you need to pass a couple of different things. First, you pass a multiple choice test that's graded automatically, and then at that point you get to take a test of one of our service levels. So, for example, you would take the standard level test. That's then graded by a senior translator. A senior translator is someone that we found, we've gone through their resume, we've seen that they've been a professional translator for X number of years, and we trust them to be able to moderate the quality within that pool. It might be one, it might be multiple, depending on the size of the pool. And then, typically what happens is every once in a while, randomly, your work as a translator will be checked by these senior translators as well. So it's not just you get in and you're kind of allowed to run rampant. You are kind of make sure that your work is being checked and being monitored. If we get a quality complaint, typically what we do is we talk to the senior translator and we get that work checked. So it's a very case-by-case basis. And sometimes they say, yeah, this was bad, let's revise it, or let's refund the money. And we try to be honest and straightforward about that. Or sometimes they'll say, actually, this is in line with what Gengo delivers. And then we kind of work with the customer to see what other solutions we can do to make sure that they're satisfied with the quality output for future work.
All right, then I have a question for Igor. It's about the managing multi-platform. Many times when you first start, actually many companies now are starting mobile, versus, the web and versus desktop. Then can you tell us a little bit about, what is the strategy there and if you are actually making changes depending on the market?
Okay, we're definitely not doing any changes depending on the market. We have, our goal was to be on every platform because since Evernote is a tool to capture information, store it and share it, it was essential for us to be natively on all platforms. So we support Windows, right from the start we supported Windows and Mac and then iOS and then Android and BlackBerry and all the emerging devices and platforms, some of which are no longer there. But it was, for us as a small company, it was pretty good strategy. When we knew that a new platform is emerging, we wanted to be there right from the first start when the new App Store appeared, and we wanted to be promoted there. And this is where we got our initial user base. So we try to support as much platforms as we can, and this is a good challenge in terms of localization.
Thank you. And then I have another question for Tex. Can you expand on you've been working with a lot of the startups, and can you tell us about the roadmap, the language roadmaps that you've seen, and what you see in the current landscape? What are the languages and countries that you see are being targeted by these companies?
Yeah, so, well, I can't speak to anyone's specific plan, but the variation, so the graph you had up kind of suggested that you grow from where there's complexity in internationalization, like you start out with an English product and you expand to Western Europe, then maybe you expand to Asia and then other languages. And that's a model that stems from maybe the difficulty or the differences from an internationalization point of view. But most companies respond more to business needs and don't follow that trend. So, you know, as Igor mentioned, he sees an opportunity in Japan, and maybe it would be nice to expand in their language capabilities where they already have, you know, a good chance of having high quality support through the other European languages perhaps, but you go where the opportunity is. And I think for a lot of companies it's where does the business seem to draw them, or where do they have, maybe even if they don't have customers, it's where they have opportunities with partners that they can bring them into market, and they follow that model. And then there is a unspoken reality, which is the CEO has a cousin in some country, and the CEO says, I'm familiar with that country and I want to go visit my cousin, so we're doing development for that. So I'm a little bit cynical, but I've actually run into that enough times to know that follow the politics more than anything else. So does that answer your question?
You know, I want to share also my experience because right now I'm in a social enterprise, and we originally had a roadmap about where we were going to be going, you know, what countries, you know, this is the plan. It was all very nice on paper. And then we're building the platform, and believe it or not, there's all these, basically all these customers that are basically appearing from all over the place and want to use our platform, and we really didn't know about them. They were not on the roadmap. This basically has been a very organic growth. Then we're in the process of basically catching up with this, you know, with this demand. And in a way, you know, what we originally thought that was going to be the roadmap is like kind of down the drain, and now we're basically focusing on organic growth. That is actually really, really interesting. I have another question for Tex. You talked about non-traditional tools in internationalization in the startups. Can you please talk more about that? And can you give us some examples?
Of non-traditional tools, most of those are proprietary, and I think, as you've heard here, some companies will want to develop their own systems, especially in startups. There's a lot of, well, in all high-tech companies, there's a lot of not invented here, and in startups, there's this idea we're doing things different, and we have to do everything different, and I think there's a trade-off which really has to be questioned, because often the products they're delivering and the space they're in is different, but the tools can be applied, and whatever the core skills of the company, they're not often in the linguistic area and they're not knowledgeable. But a lot of engineers will say, you know, pulling strings out of code, I can write something in a couple days to do that. All of you here have probably seen the experience of a year later, they're still learning about rules for language and why whatever tools they're creating is still under development. It's usually a multi-year project, and they feel great because they're learning on the job and they're having a lot of fun learning, but you could have just gone out and bought a tool to do that. So you really have to ask yourself, one, where are my core skills, and is this where I want to apply my resources? And number two, is the product really that different? Is the space really that different as to whether or not I can use existing tools? Now, there are technologies, usually if you're working with the newest technologies, when the mobile space first came up, a lot of the development systems for working on mobile phones didn't really have a clue about internationalization, or they had a completely different format. They weren't using properties files or resource files. They were using spreadsheets and other things, and then you did need to develop some kind of either conversion or other process to develop it just because it wasn't there. That happens, you have to recognize it, and you have to decide whether you're fitting in to an existing model and just converting over to it, or you really want to develop something completely different. And be careful. My advice is does it fit in your core space? Is it good investment? Can you acquire the skills? Can you outsource it? And is it something that you really need to do Is there added value or something that maybe you're better off just, trying to leverage some other way of dealing with it? Was that where you were going?
And Igor, do you have any examples of non-traditional tools that you had to develop in your project?
Well, for us, everything was custom and unusual. And actually, like what Tex described was basically what we're doing. Yeah, but again, it's not only a lot of fun. I mean, it wasn't just like the not an end here syndrome. I think that our company benefits every day because we develop those internal tools. Even if you go like with a traditional approach and go to localization agency, they still will not provide you the tailored way of providing the whole experience between developing the code, internationalization, localization, translation, and all the way back. So we were lucky that we didn't have money to go for a traditional approach, and we had to invent something different, and we, I think, managed to invent something different.
I will say we've had two examples in IMUG meetings where both Twitter and Facebook came and gave a talk about their process, and I think it was a long time ago. Facebook came and spoke, and it was when the group was much smaller. We had about 20 internationalization, localization experts in the room. Facebook came in and they said, we want to talk to you about our localization process. Number one, we can't do whatever anyone else is doing. And so then they went on to describe what they were doing. And the 20 of us in the room were rolling our eyes going, you clearly don't understand about word order, plurals, languages. And as they described the lessons they learned, they started to say, and we learned about this and this, and we're going, yeah, well, so why did you waste all of your time? You could have asked any one of us, and there are tools that do it. But then, towards the end of the discussion, they said, we went through an agile process, an iteration, and by the way, we came up with these other ideas, and now we're doing these things. And by the end of the discussion, everyone in the room was going, that's a great idea. That's a novel approach. So on the one hand, maybe they could have avoided that exercise and not learned on the job. But when applied, enough times with an innovative approach and maybe a lack of knowledge of the traditional approach, you get something that's new and better. And some of the crowdsourcing ideas around localization have also gone that path. So it's not necessarily bad. It depends on the space of your company, where you want to invest, and if you can leverage that investment and gain something from it that really benefits what you're doing. So I'll offer that as the counterexample, but you have to have the resources and the willingness to apply that.
That's great. Then one more thing I wanted to add, and is that in my experience in the last basically 3 years working with startups, is that when you work in engineering, is only one area where basically you need to focus on. In a small company, actually everything becomes very, very close, and you need to basically work with each one of the functional leaders, from marketing, business development, finance, legal, customer support. Then whenever you are basically implementing the internationalization process here in engineering, you need to ensure that you're going to have processes that are basically going to be able to support that international expansion. And many times includes developing, internal policies that are going to basically store data, because that according to different countries are going to need different data requirements. How are we going to? What is going to be our privacy policy, right? That's something that changes from country to country. What is going to be regarding finances? Are we going to be supporting the local currency What payment methods what are we going to be supporting, what taxes are we going to have to pay, and those vary, are we going to basically pay in the country, or are we going to retain and then pay at the end of the year? And every country has a different tax life cycle that you need to be aware of, and tax regulations. Then as we're moving in, and this is something that you usually don't see as much when you're sitting in the engineering team in a bigger company, but when you are in the startup environment, it's right in your face. You basically need to ensure that all these systems are working together, and that it goes beyond, the implementation of your product to basically launch it internationally. Then I have one more question for Jamie, and then we'll close up and have more questions from you. And is that from the vendor perspective, are you seeing like any particular trends going to any particular regions right now that you say, oh, it's like most companies are looking at this particular market? Is there like a hot market out there that we should know?
That's a good question. Oftentimes when people come to us, they're pretty new in the process, and so they do want to launch into sort of the more typical areas. So I would say it tends to be French, Italian, German, Spanish, and then also Japanese as well. Being a Japanese company, we get a lot of Japanese customers, and so they also want to go into English, of course, but I think that also draws customers who want to go into Japan, and there's a little bit more security, I would say, because of the fact that we're a Japanese company.
It's a proven market. All right, and then just to end, in startups there is something called pivots, and what that means is that there's a lot of expectations, and I have been in companies where we basically put a lot of effort into going international, and the needle doesn't move. Then these are the types of questions that you need to basically ask. That is the exit criteria. And basically figure out if you're actually in the right markets, if you're producing the right product, also, and on and on. And you basically have to have these types of checkpoints to ensure that you basically are making the right investments. And it's just so important that you basically have the discipline to sit down and say, no, we need to basically figure out something else, because otherwise it's not going to work. You have something?
No, I'm just wondering where you call it exit criteria.
Because that's actually a standard term.
Okay.
Yeah. And one more, the last one is the key takeaways. We basically summarize some of the list. And with that, then I just want to ask you if you have any more questions now at the end of the panel. Yes.
Okay. Is there still a microphone up here? Yeah. Can you pass that one and that way, unless you still have a question?
Is it on? This is for Igor. You said you're doing your marketing localization with Google Docs. Does that go for the website? I have two questions. One is that how you're doing the website as well? And then I'll ask the other one after.
No, website is like fully automated as all our software, so we treat it as a software basically. And Google Docs localization is for arbitrary text documents like blog posts and tweets and like other social media things, emails, and all this stuff.
So your system pull out all the text from the website, put it back in, and start doing all the other areas, right?
Yeah, if you're interested about like technical approach to this, so we have a pretty basic setup. So it's a PHP site. There's nothing fancy about like the technology behind it. And what we do is we have a parser for PHP which extracts all the strings from HTML from PHP pages, and it pushes them to translation, and we generate static pages which are localized. So we physically have copies of the pages, and that's it.
The second part of my question was that in marketing, particularly websites, it's pretty graphics intensive. So do you have people who are doing kind of post work to make sure text expansion, you have to change the graphics around, et cetera, et cetera?
First of all, we try not to use any text and images because it's a pain in the ass. The second thing is when we absolutely need to, all our designers are educated that this is something that needs to be available in multiple languages. So in each time we see if we want to have something available in English because it's obvious, something like, I don't know, like name of the check mark, which doesn't tell much, just an illustration. And in other cases, we will create different versions for different languages and add this ability to like override this image for each language.
Over here.
Hi.
Next over here, then you.
That's okay. I'm actually glad you brought up the privacy policies. So I was very curious, when you translate things like terms and conditions and privacy policies, what level of legal scrutiny do you do in those markets? I mean, do you actually have, corporate legal look at it, or do you outsource it to like a third party, like attorney in the market to have the policies reviewed?
I can tell you my experience that we actually did the latter, and that meant basically hiring people. We had the standard US policy, and then we defined what were the some of the points that we needed to check, and we passed that to the local lawyer that was going to basically, it's not only translation because they have to basically adapt it to the local laws to ensure that it meets that criteria. And then when you actually go and at least the companies that I'm working on, they're web-based or they're mobile, then basically through a reverse API address lookup, then we know what country they're coming from, and we basically display the appropriate privacy policy that for that particular region or country. Yes.
I just have one follow-up question. How expensive is that to do?
Very. It is very expensive.
That's what I thought.
It is very expensive. Then basically, one of the things that we decided to do for some of these was to basically keep the English, and then once just for the MVP, as we were basically getting a feeling about the product and the markets, and then basically make a strategic investment. Some of these translations were like 80K.
What?
80K to translate a privacy. Yes.
So, are you guys thinking of expanding into Indian languages? This is for Evernote. Sorry.
Well, India is an important market for us, but
initially we realized that people know English pretty well there. So
our first approach was not to translate and see how things go. We'll probably go for other languages, and our long-term goal is to eventually support more languages, more than priority languages that we pay for, to support through volunteers. And what we are currently developing is the ability to leverage crowdsourcing to its full potential.
That's a bad luck for us, I guess. But as a professional writer, I actually search for my language support in mobile almost always, every day, because I need it in my mobile, like Evernote or something somewhere. So I think it's there is a market, like a professional writers in India, even they are looking for that, I guess. So.
Yeah, sure. We have a decent analytics team which knows about all the data about all the countries and revenues, and we try to be pragmatic. We don't always go into some market and spend money translating things and then seeing what happens. We look for the trends, and if we see that there's uptrend in this market, we want to ignite this with better and provide some translations for it.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, there's a difference between localizing the product, meaning the user interface, versus maybe supporting Indian languages in the editing. Are you looking for the latter or the former or both?
Both.
But is there a minimum requirement? I mean, you're looking for editing tools, right?
Yes.
So if it's supported, which language do you need?
Telugu. It's
okay. Telugu. So if it edited Telugu but had an English interface, that would be acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about the internet.
Yeah.
Well, I think
not it. Sorry.
Speaking about Evernote, I think we're good at supporting any languages, and I think we didn't have any problems with supporting Unicode right from the start, because when we started developing the products, we used modern tools, modern SDKs, modern libraries and databases, and support for Unicode was right there from the start, and we ensured that people can at least share data in their own language and type and so on.
Not always people looks for machine translation. I guess this is enough. Yeah, that's more than enough for people like me. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Thanks. You mentioned that one of the problems that you have is the choosing of fonts at the very beginning. So that just gave me the idea. How do you manage the prioritization of your projects in your internationalization department? Because, for example, I've seen that Evernote is ever expanding to. I've seen integration with Moleskine, where you can actually write it that has OCR across, and you can integrate that to your laptop. Like, I've seen a couple of initiatives in Evernote about that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to is, you're going to get this project where you have to localize for new joint ventures, if you will, or new projects, versus making the decision of, I want to take away the churn that I had because of this bad decision of funds. So, in short, how do you make that decision or the business case to prioritize your project within the department for a startup?
How we prioritize translation of different projects, right?
Correct.
Well, I think it's not the decision of the our internal localization agency to define priorities. These come from our marketing department based on their researches. We don't question the priorities. We know from business development with these vendors, we know the list of languages that they want to support. As for example, our partnerships with Samsung or LG, they internally have very strict opinions on what languages they should support. So we deal with that. We work with them and provide translation for those languages. But again, it's not our decision. We just get some instructions from our marketing and business development department and work on that and just ensure that these priorities are enforced.
For the companies that I've spoken with the exception of the CEO cousin scenario, it's usually two-pronged, right? Because you want to look for the business opportunity, but then you have to look at the cost of development. Every time you add a language, the cost is not the same for each market. And that's usually where I get brought in as a consultant, is to provide an assessment of some kind of what are the issues in a particular market, be it fonts or writing systems for Telugu or privacy issues and the like. And you have to build out the case of what is the work that has to be done, what would be the cost, and then that's usually traded off against the list of opportunities you have in different markets. So usually there's a business case to be made and some analysis around that.
Anybody else? Questions? All right.
So at startups where there's so few resources and so little time.
Speak up a little bit.
Okay. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Where there's so few resources and so little time, historically, there's been a tendency to not think about international until somebody's already sold French translation or something in French. Do you find these days that there's a little bit more of a lead time of
say, a startup thinking about internationalizing with a little more advance than maybe 5 years ago? Just what is your sense? Has it gotten better, or is it much the same?
Who are you asking?
You and Claudia, but anybody can chip in with an opinion.
Yeah, no, there's no rhyme or reason. Sometimes, you know, especially in the smaller companies, this sales guy will find an opportunity, and sometimes it's already in the contract before you hear about it, and you get to tell somebody what it's really going to cost. But it's all over the map. You know, different companies have different approaches and processes. You find a little bit of everything. So some companies are better about it than that. Sometimes, you know, often you're working with partners who are global themselves, right? So it's not, you know, very far of a reach to have a partner say, we'd also like to have you in another market. And especially, even if you're a startup, you may be selling to enterprises, and the enterprises will drag you into all sorts of markets. So it varies how you get there and what kind of pressure you'll be under to make it happen.
Yeah, what I've seen is everything is about growth, and when they are growing, when they start and they get a lot of traction in the US, then the fastest they get to traction in the US, the sooner they're going to start looking abroad. And this is where, you know, there's this tipping point where basically they decide that they want to go international. I've spoken to some like tiny little companies, and it's like, well, you really have to start thinking about international now. And they start to think, it's like, I have to finish like these features first before I can basically go international. Then you see like, kind of like that maturity level makes a lot of difference whenever they start to decide to start to look at the international market. But something that talking to Igor, we were having coffee and talking about the panel, is that really with a lot of the technology that already exists, you know, a lot of the things are coming for free. You know, it's not like, you know, 10 years ago and all that. Then even though some of the, some startups, you know, are using standard tools and they're using standard libraries that are supporting Unicode and so on. But the problem comes when they really need to basically start to, you know, to localize, to start to, you know, accept international currencies and payment methods. When really that is when it's become very obvious that they need to invest in internationalization.
Okay, Norbert gets the last word.
Yeah.
Well, you get the last word.
Not the last word, but just a question. For Claudia just mentioned Unicode, maybe Tex also can chip in about his experience.
Whoever's speaking, stand up. So we can...
Okay.
Oh, Norbert.
In the past, character encoding issues were often a big problem that we had to deal with. And I was wondering to what extent that's still an issue, or startups these days just starting with Unicode and everything happens to work. What the current situation with that?
What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
How many character encoding issues do you run into and to deal with? Is that still an issue, or is it basically solved?
Then you're talking about the characters? What? sorry, never.
Yeah, it's exactly about the character.
Oh, the character support? Okay, I can answer that, but start.
So yes, it's still an issue. I work with a lot of companies. They're natively Unicode, but then they have to integrate with all sorts of partners. And there are still many companies, sizable companies, that have restrictions for one reason or another. And they're still limited to, actually they're limited to ASCII in many cases, absolutely. And these are global players, by the way. So yes, we still have issues around encodings. Not so much the dealing with the large multiplicity of encodings, but the few players that are operating internationally that are just saying, you know, we're just going to deal with a very limited character set. An example I can share with you is when you send an SMS message, right? The phone carriers have their own, at least as of a year or two ago when I was working, in that space. They have their own proprietary encoding. So you send a message and you go, I'm here in the US and it goes to Verizon. Verizon sends it to another carrier for global transport. And then it goes to somebody else. And then it goes down to a cell phone in pick your favorite country. Travel through 4 carriers. They're not using Unicode. Each of those carriers has their own little encoding, and if they think they're dealing with Spanish, they have their encoding for just some Spanish characters, which may not be, in fact, all of the characters used in Spanish. And they'll, bang it around, and the next thing you know, your SMS message doesn't look the way you expect. So, yeah, there's still plenty of those issues. They're increasingly fewer, but you still have to deal with it. And if you're working in the mobile space, you really need a testing strategy beyond just simulations, because the simulators will work fine, but the actual delivery of messages won't look right because of this issue with the carriers.
And I want to add, like in my experience, sometimes when they call you in, it's a little bit late. They already set up the database, and the database is not set up to use Unicode. Then they already started to basically have data in the database that is not Unicode. Their mail is not set up to support Unicode. And basically, each one of the different areas in engineering, it's going to basically have a different level of support. And what I had to do is to basically ensure that each one of the libraries and the and the applications and everything was basically supporting that first, and then making it local aware, because that's the other thing that people don't think about, that we need to make sure that it's going to be support marketization and implementing the locale in each one of the different tables and the different pages and so on, the different features. Thank you.
And thank you, panelists. So how long do we get before you kick us out? 4 minutes, she says. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much, and thanks to the panel. Thank you.
That was great.